Hello, everybody. This is going to be an article summary of Externalities, Markets, and Government Policy by Roy Ruffin. I hope you enjoy this quick little look at the article. Basically, before Coase, economists said that unpriced benefits or costs, those externalities, were a major exception to Adam Smith's invisible hand, right? The invisible hand that said, if we kind of kept government out of things, the invisible hand of market forces will efficiently allocate our resources in goods and services. Now, Coase basically showed that because we have these externalities, we might need a government solution. However, we do not necessarily need a government solution. It was going to depend upon the institutional setting, the size of transaction costs. He basically, again, said that market transactions require low transaction costs. If they become too high, then people are not going to trade. Firms will exist to economize on different costs, right, to try to keep them low. Basically, what happened was Coase tried to shift the terms of the debate, moving economics, right, from saying that government has a specific role to a more neutral position, saying we're going to have to take a look at this on a case-by-case basis. Okay, so what does the theorem actually say? Well, the theorem, according to most economics textbooks, I found this particular definition on Amos Webb, right? Externalities can be efficiently controlled through voluntary negotiations among affected parties. For example, when you have pollution, clearly there is a negative externality. So we have to have voluntary negotiation between those who are doing the polluting and those who are being affected by the pollution. Key to that Coase theorem is that many of these negative externality problems involve goods with no clear-cut ownership or property rights. If we had clear-cut rights, then the owners would have an incentive to achieve the efficient level of production because they're going to have to bear the actual costs. Right? So anyway, the theorem says it doesn't matter really who gets the property rights. We just simply need voluntary negotiation, and therefore owners are going to have that incentive to protect the quality of their resources to continue forward. Okay? If I really wanted to boil this theorem down, I go from theorem defined to theorem refined. I would say that private bargaining is going to result in an efficient solution to externalities as long as transaction costs are low, parties have information about costs and benefits, and the parties are behaving in a rational manner. If we want to go back to our introductory microeconomics classes, we'll know that most of the time we use this Pigovian taxes as a way to take a look at externalities. So when there was a negative externality, government would impose a tax equal to the cost of the externality. And of course, we could also look at it from the positive perspective. When there's a positive externality, such as with public education, things of this nature, maybe government should issue a subsidy equal to the value of that externality. Okay, so that's one way to do it, where government steps in and applies subsidies or applies taxes. Coase, back in 1960, said, look, here's an example. Let's take a look at railroads, and let's take a look at farms that run, or railroads, rail lines that go past farms. And maybe the railroad would cause fires on some of these farms, right? So in the first example that he gave us, the railroad would have to compensate the farmer. The railroad was actually liable for damages, if you will. In the second example he took a look at, the railroad was granted the right to damage the farmer. So the railroad has the rights and the farmer did not, if you will. In the final example that we take a look at here, Pigovian taxes were being applied. So the railroad would be taxed the amount of the externality. And then, of course, those revenues are going to be passed along to somebody else. Let's consider the results here and the ramifications from Coase. Basically, in all of these tables that you look at, the maximum benefit to society is going to come to $190 if you look at all the little numbers there. And that's going to be reached when one train is run and one field is planted. If you compare the first two tables, it basically gives us that theorem that assuming zero transaction costs, the allocation of resources is going to depend on the existence of well-defined rights, not on who actually possesses such property rights, whether it's the railroad or whether or not it's the farmer. Okay? In essence, Table 3 with the Pigovian tax becomes unnecessary because that maximum benefit to society, the $190, is reached anyway, even without government intervention. That's basically what I've put here on this slide, but I wanted to have that table there for you to take a look at. So what can we conclude? Well, Ruffin concludes in his article that the debate over the theorem basically I guess Coase is pointing to that flaw in the argument for correcting market failures. He said, and I quote here, while public production of the good or Pigovian taxes might correct for market failures, theory can't solve the problem without a detailed analysis of the institutional structure of the problem at hand, right? So Pigovian taxes require calculation issues. They bring up solution issues with payments, all that kind of good stuff. Basically, Coase put it, quote, such tax proposals are the stuff that dreams are made of, meaning it's very, very difficult to get at this kind of a thing. Okay, let me skip down here to the bottom. And basically, Ruffin is making the argument, and I have to say that I probably support his conclusion here, that there is not an a priori argument for government intervention, but there's also not an a priori argument for laissez-faire. Each case needs to be decided on that pragmatic principle of what works best in the real world. If you want to take a look at this more on your own time, here are the references that I used. Thank you very much. Have a great day.